Well, hello everyone. It's Kirsten Martin here from Calm Business, and it's been a while since we've had a Calm Business conversation. But I was chatting to my new friend, Nicola Holmes, the other day, and we had such a wonderful conversation. And I thought, you know what? I want to kickstart these conversations again by, talking to Nicola. And for those of you who are new to Calm Business Conversations, I started my own business, online business 10 years ago. I started as a web designer. Eventually, I became a course creator. I taught Squarespace courses for almost 8 years. And then last year in 2024, I pivoted to offering platform independent business and marketing courses for solopreneurs. And all of this happens under the umbrella of Calm Business. Calm Business started a few years ago when I created my first Calm Business review, which is it's a end of the year. Most people use it at the end of the year, where you review your business, you set intentions for the new year, and it's a free thing that I offer, and people really resonated with the whole Calm Business approach. And it's kind of become a little bit of a movement actually since then. And so I decided, to rename my business to Calm Business, and to create a new website, and to really create like a counter, what do you want to call it, counter movement, to like hustle culture. So we are not into the hustle culture here at Calm Business. And we're much more about, being authentic and genuine and having sustainable businesses, because the hustle burns you out, eventually. And we are all about, sustaining our businesses with integrity. We feel very strongly about, being inclusive and diverse, and being kind. My gosh, we need kindness in this world. And how this all came about is that I wrote a newsletter about politics. So as of recording this, we are in April 2025. We are, 100 days. Actually, I think today is the 100th day. So that we are recording this, and the 100th day of, the Trump administration. And for many of us, the last 3 months have been really hard. It's been a time of chaos, and we feel very concerned that our democracy is being dismantled. But as small business owners, we also really have to balance, how much do we share about, our political views, in our businesses. Does business and politics actually mix? And, personally, I mean, I don't talk that much about politics, but I have certainly become a lot more engaged in the last, actually in the last year, and because I realized it's a privilege if we don't have to care about politics. It's an absolute privilege. And only those of us who are not affected by politics can take that position, which, to be honest, was me most of my life, because the system worked, it worked for people like me. And now I realize, that we're still very far from a system that actually works for everyone, which personally I feel very strongly about, and so I talked about this a little bit in a newsletter. And as always happens, I had a lot of unsubscribes, but I also had a lot of replies. I think that was the most replies I've ever had to a newsletter, and it was amazing and really heartfelt, thoughtful replies. And Nicola was one of them. And so we started chatting a little bit and to get to know each other. And Nicola is a coach. And I started subscribing to your newsletter. And it's one of my favorites, because you always write from your heart, and you always offer calmness and practical advice, and I just always feel I always really enjoy your newsletters. Always look forward to receiving them. And so I said, well, why don't we have a, conversation about these turbulent times that we live in, and how do we, cultivate our calm businesses in these turbulent times, and how do we stay calm, and also stay focused on our small businesses, and while also, maybe affecting some change, in the small ways we can in this world. So before we continue with our conversation, I would love for you, Nicola, to introduce yourself. I know you're from Canada, my favorite country, and tell us a little bit more about, your background and what you do.
Sure. Oh, I'm so glad to be here, Kirsten. And thanks for those kind words about my newsletter. That I don't think I've ever received that feedback that it makes you feel calm. So thank you. Yeah, so I live in a small community called Peterborough, north of Toronto, just to
I
locate my.
know, I've been there
Oh,
like
cool.
many
Okay.
decades ago.
Okay, small world. And yeah, so I'm a life coach and I really specialize in change and transition. And I would say people often show up when they're feeling lost or stuck or kind of trapped or stagnant in an important personal or professional area of their lives. And they seek coaching to gain new clarity, kind of get encouragement for brave, creative steps that are possible in their lives. And I've been doing this for, wait a minute, yeah, 17 years. So I'm almost 50 now. I started in my early 30s. And I guess just to give a bit of context, I also worked in the nonprofit sector for about 20 years. So lots of teaching and working in social services, and especially the violence against women, gender violence sector. So I've always been supporting people with learning, transition, transformation, what's possible. And I guess I would just say, I notice that like who tends to gravitate towards me seems to be evolving and aging with me. So at this point, it seems like a lot of people in midlife kind of sorting out those points of review and revision. Sometimes it's like the kids have launched, or a divorce, or an illness, or a job loss. And my goodness, here we are in these bumpy times. Maybe I'll segue a little with our turbulent times. I'm noticing the way these turbulent times are rippling into individual lives. So helping people with career transition at a time when economies are tightening and unstable, and how do we navigate when things are really precarious, and yeah, general stressors that I can see weighing on people in their individual lives. So I guess I just would say finally, yeah, that's my privilege, is maybe helping people find that calm container where they're going to be listened to, supported, encouraged, and I have a real penchant for working with people who identify as late bloomers. I do myself, like I had my children later in life. I came to my vocational path later in life. I don't think I've told you this yet, but it's been a long held dream to write books. And I'm just on the cusp of daring to turn that into a reality. So, all to say, I really love working with people who have sort of unactualized potential, parts of them that they want to dare, turn to realities at any stage of life. So, hopefully, that paints a picture.
Oh yeah, no,
My
I
work.
think that's wonderful, and that's why obviously, I kind of was drawn to you, and why we had such a rapport. And I mean, I'm a late bloomer. I started my business in my early 50s,
I know, I
and
saw that. I love
yeah,
that.
so I just totally jumped in, and I thought, well, what's the worst that could happen? It could fail, then I'd have to get a job again. Okay, fine, So, and but yeah, I think what I really love is that you actually, to me, personify what's good about coaching, because the coaching industry, has gotten itself a little bit of a bad rep,
Yeah.
because you have so many scammy coaches out there. And it really is a shame, because there are some really good coaches out there. And I have worked with coaches,
Oh, cool.
throughout my business journey, And it's been so helpful, as you mentioned earlier, to give clarity, to help you when you feel stuck, I mean, that's probably one of the most helpful things about it for me, that they help me unstuck, or get unstuck. And I think, especially, the people you work with, the late bloomers, there's a lot of changes, happening at that stage in life. And to
Mhm.
really have someone to help you navigate that, and someone who's not like attached to you, like a family member or a partner or so, someone who
Yeah.
actually, can step back a little bit and take a bigger view. And, so I really appreciate that because I actually have a lot of love and respect for coaches.
I think I love those points, and I think you're right, and I think as always we need to be discerning when we're trying to find a professional who's a good fit for us. But I'm with you. There may be those that don't fit, especially if it sort of almost embodies some of the worst of a hyper individualistic, hyper performance culture. Talk about hustle.
Yeah.
That's not my orientation. Just to sort of one more, I really love that sort of whole person coaching where it's really that essential.
Yeah.
How do we anchor in our strengths? What is it we really yearn for? How do we nurture the courage to pursue that which is really true to us? Those kind of essential, what makes for a meaningful human life, whether we're wanting to tweak our health and care for our bodies, slow down and nurture a more sustainable way of living, or maybe it is a stretchy goal like, I want to, try to run my own business in my 50s. Not everyone has your courage. So I hear your risk tolerance, but I feel like as a coach, sometimes we're there to
Yeah.
help hold faith as people, prepare to take some risks to
Yeah.
expand their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've kind of always been like that. I've always kind of, if something wasn't quite working, I thought, okay, I'll try something else. Like I'm a life experimenter. I experiment a lot, because I always think, well, I can always do something else. I always feel like I have choices, and so if something doesn't work out, but I know that is not it comes down to a lot that I actually talk about in my business, having a safety net, and to me, this is kind of like my psychological safety net that I always feel, well, things somehow will work out, and if this doesn't work out, I'll try something else, but there are always options. However, and speaking of options and all this, I think what we're seeing right now, happening
Mhm.
is that a lot of choices and options are being taken away from people.
Yeah.
And so, we are white women, in a world, where, I mean, I have always felt most of my life, I grew up in Germany, where we had a strong social safety net. And that's partly why I got so involved in politics now, because I always felt, my mom was a single mother of three. She got divorced in the late 60s at a time when this was not the thing to do.
Mhm.
And she managed because she was, first of all, a very resilient woman. And also she had government help, so we were
Yeah.
able to have affordable housing. I mean, it was small. We lived in a 1.5 bedroom apartment with four of us, but we, had a safe, stable home, an apartment. My mom had actually lived in there for, I think, 35 years, all in all. And we had food, we had affordable health care. We never had to worry about having to pay for a doctor's visit. I mean, that just was not a thing. And we had really good public education, plus, the option to go to university and that not, putting you into huge debt. So
Mhm.
that's kind of the system I grew up with. And of course, at the time, I took it for granted totally,
Yes.
because I didn't know anything better or anything else. But
Mhm.
then when I traveled around and I lived in the UK for many years, and in Canada, I lived for a little while. And of course, for the last 20 years, I've been here in the US. And I realized, oh my gosh, this system is just so different, actually. And
Mhm.
yes, on one hand, you have opportunities, it's maybe easier to start a business, so I think it probably was easier to do that here than it would have been in Germany.
Mhm.
And so the whole, thing about, you have opportunities and you can make whatever you want out of it. I think that is true to an extent. There is that sense of freedom over here. But healthcare is crushing, and of course now as I get older, I'm feeling that a lot more. I've
Yeah.
never paid so much for like medical bills as I do here, just normal things, just a normal doctor's visit the other day cost me $300. It was just a normal follow-up visit, nothing special. And so, so there are a lot of things, that I am learning about, of course, America and the American, like a government structure and all of that. And I realized that, for instance, I love AOC, Alexandria
Oh, yes, yes,
Ocasio-Cortez,
yes,
who many people say, or, well, people on the right say, oh, she is a socialist. And she is, you know what? She is talking about the system that I grew up with. That
yes.
is actually what she is advocating. And I can't, I can't tell you how how much that system contributed to my sense of safety and also inner safety. So
Yes.
I grew up,
Yeah.
believing that, if everything fails, I mean, if it really, like, if I completely fail, and you know what, the government still has my back, because there is a
Yeah.
social safety net. Now, I never, took advantage of that, and because there was also a sense of pride that you didn't want to do that,
Yeah.
and but it was there. And
Yeah.
so now I feel, that a lot of things coming back to what we said earlier, these opportunities, that really we want everyone to have. There's still so much discrimination here in this country, so much racism, and now civil rights are being taken away from people.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking, and as small business owners, we're often, as you know too, the lines between business and personal are very blurred.
Yes.
So what happens really in the world around us does affect us, and that is why I started talking about it. How now you are in Canada, of course,
Yep.
and I apologize, I I have to say, out of all the things, that I expected from the Trump administration, I did not see that one coming, that he
No.
started talking about annexing Canada, basically, which is like the craziest thing in the world to me, and personally also the most heartbreaking. So how do these things affect you up in Canada? I know you just had your election as well.
Yep.
And how did that go?
Well, I'll answer to a few of those. So, I mean, for me, and I'll just be transparent, I am definitely liberal leaning socially, in particular, politically left leaning. I'm quite passionate about sort of LGBTQ community. I'm queer identified myself, sort of like you're talking about, to become more and more conscious about racial oppression, all different kinds of oppression and marginalization. So for me, these sort of right-wing authoritarian trends that we're seeing around the globe,
Yeah.
frankly, are frightening and disheartening to me. And so I will just say I'm relieved at we just had a liberal, candidate who's going to be our prime minister, and we seem to have evaded that right-wing trend for the moment, but by very close margins. We are not immune up here. And yeah, I mean, I think hopefully a lot of people know that, but I would say as a Canadian and sort of this national moment, we are shaken and shocked by this Trump 2.0 era, the threats to our sovereignty and the trade war that we really feel like he initiated when he sort of struck down a lot of the very tenets that he recently had renegotiated with us in the prior
Yeah.
term, like a trade agreement he crafted
I
and
know.
oversaw. So there's a lot of anger, fear, hurt underneath, I think, hurt, but it's already harming our economy. So there's a lot of um, vulnerability and people feeling shaken. We're both galvanized to respond to the moment. There's more of a sense of patriotism, nationalism than I've seen maybe ever. But I think there is still that sense of quite a lot of fear and concern. And maybe just to really bring our businesses in, Kirsten, I think over the last few years, I have chosen to weave in and be transparent about some of the world events. When Ukraine was invaded, I've spoken about Gaza and Israel and tensions in the Middle East. Not just tensions, that's a bit of a euphemism, the really painful wars,
Yeah.
conflict, genocide, as people interpret it. So, and then more recently, Trump, some of the Canadian politics. So I think I'll just say for me, that feels relevant because at the end of the day, I'm coaching human beings who are also citizens and for whom these events are ricocheting and affecting. So I think I choose to name some of those. And I think probably the people who gravitate to me and who stay with me are somewhat like-minded and like-hearted. Not that we agree on everything. I'm sure those who really vehemently disagree have, they shed themselves as they need.
Yeah.
But part of my work has been kind of turning to how do we deal with mass destabilization or even arguably mass trauma with mass resilience? So I've been experimenting with more offerings of group gatherings, community gatherings, mostly virtual, because I think there's a risk that isolation renders us really vulnerable in these kind of times to despair, grief, rage, just sort of overwhelm. And so I just have this sense for me that I want to create containers where we can resource with each other and to know we're not alone. And then how each of us kind of feeling sturdier, more resourced, I hope that ripples. So I've chosen to name that and just trying to sort of meet the moment. And the other thing I'll say, and maybe this is a little more overtly political, but I've really appreciated hearing you talk about, for example, Germany, pre-World War II history, rise of authoritarianism. And like, I think it's important if we have the privilege to use our voices when human rights are under attack, democracies are under attack, the sooner we speak up, the greater the chance that resistance can be effective and that we don't get further down a track of authoritarianism and tyranny where it gets more threatening, truly higher risk, and then it gets even harder and harder and more risk-laden to use our voices. So I guess I will just say for myself, it doesn't mean people have to pivot their whole business and suddenly become a political analyst. But I'm noticing I respect business owners who don't seem completely tone deaf, who are at least naming or referencing that these are unusual times in North America. I mean, profoundly. So I just will say for me, that's been my choice so far. Maybe I'll tone it down, but so far, I feel like we're on the deck of the Titanic. I don't want to just keep dancing and singing like everything's the same. And I would say you're doing that. I'm appreciating the balance that you're weaving.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you saying that, and like I said earlier, I was never a particularly political person. I mean, when I was younger, I found politics quite boring, and then I got older, and I thought, oh yeah, you can't trust any politicians; they're all corrupt and they're all crooks, and all of that. I became quite cynical, and but when things started to unravel over here in the US, and I think this is partly why I reacted as strongly as I did, is because it reminded me, as you mentioned earlier, of the stories I grew up with from my grandparents. My grandparents, I mean, they were in my life into my late 30s, so I actually had a relationship with them for a long time. And they had been through the Third Reich, and they actually liked Hitler initially. And so, when they told us, yeah, because, Germany, which hadn't been doing well economically at that point, and he really brought, the economy was strengthened. He brought a sense of national pride, that the
Yes.
Germans didn't have at that point, after
Yes.
losing World War I, going through the aftermath of that. And so he really, and then of course propaganda, right? I mean, his propaganda chief, he he knew what he was doing. And
Mhm.
so I remember my grandfather telling us, because I mean, to be honest, as a kid, I didn't even like it when they constantly talked about the war and all those things. I thought, oh
Mhm.
God, do we have to talk about this again? It's so long ago, and it's so a lot of times, for me, it was like, oh yeah, I kind of tried to tune out, but you know what? A lot of it stuck, and a lot of it came back. And he was telling us how in the like early 1940s they woke up. They woke up to what was really happening, and then my grandfather joined the resistance, and then
Oh,
he actually ended up in 1945, just before the war ended. He was traveling to Berlin. Now they were from Cologne in Germany, and he traveled to Berlin to help some people cross the border, and he got caught by the Russians. And
mhm.
he ended up in a Russian prison camp for 7 years. So he was 7 years. He was a prisoner of war with the Russians, and he actually wrote
Oh,
a book about that time. And cruelty is everywhere. That's all I can say. And he
mhm.
was lucky to survive.
Yeah.
And my grandmother was at home dealing with the aftermath of the war and having four young
Oh,
kids, for 7 years. And for a few of those, she didn't even know if he was still alive.
yeah.
So those events, really uh, impacted like my family, and also following generations. There was a lot of trauma, and there's other things that happened too on my mom's side, but those stories, plus growing up in Germany, where ad nauseum, they told us about, inclusivity and tolerance and diversity. And, I grew up with that. We covered that at length in school. And it was, my generation was all about the guilt, actually, all about feeling bad for what happened and making reparations and making good. And
Mhm.
I never really had the pride as being a German. I remember when I first traveled abroad, I was like almost ashamed to say, "Oh, I'm German." And
Yes.
so here in America, this whole pride and thing, was really like, "Oh, that's weird." So, but anyway, so that is just a little background, because I can see so many parallels in what my grandparents, who were eyewitnesses, so I have basically eyewitness reports of those times, what they were telling us, to what is happening now, and like
Yes.
someone said the other day, there's not going to be a bell one day and then bam, we have a dictator. No, these things, it's an erosion,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I mean, it happens. It's not slow, it's actually been happening probably for many, many years, and we're
Yeah.
now coming to the final points, but
Mhm.
I really think these are pivotal times. This is, like you said, uh, different from anything I think we have experienced before,
Mhm. Mhm.
and certainly, with Canada as well, this whole thing that's happening now between our two countries. I mean, I live 10 minutes from the Canadian border. I have a lot of friends up there. I used to live in Canada. Canada is so dear to me, and it's breaking my heart, especially as, like I said earlier, I did not see this one coming, out of all the things I
Oh,
expected.
neither did we.
Yeah,
Neither
I
did
mean,
we.
it's. So yeah, so I think, I think that is why I really appreciated, meeting you, because you also make it clear where you stand, but you also come from a point of um how do we support each other, how do we resource each other,
Mhm.
and and to be honest, and not just people who think like us, because I feel there will be a point when those that do wake up to what is going on
Yes.
will also need support.
Yes.
Certainly from what I remember my grandparents telling us, when they finally kind of woke up to what was happening, and how they then navigated that, and so I feel, as much, I think we all went through the emotions of,
Mhm.
I hate those Republicans, and I
Mhm.
but ultimately, I live actually, even though I live in a very blue state, I live in a very red little micro
Mhm.
community here. And so I
Mhm.
have neighbors, who voted for this.
Yeah.
They're lovely people, they are, they're good neighbors, and we always got on well. I like them, right?
Yes.
And but we can't talk about politics, not yet anyway.
Mhm.
But there's still people as well, I'm actually now coming to a point where I feel like, okay, we all are humans in this. They are humans as well.
That's what I was just going to jump in and say as well. I'm with you. It's like I think we may need to toggle back and forth, like as humans and as business owners, of sometimes we may find a quality of refuge to be with others who really share an affinity of a worldview and values, especially if it feels like they're really getting sort of not just eroded, but sort of tsunamied right now. So I think sometimes resourcing with that affinity makes sense. But I'm with you. At the end of the day, the more and more that we have these trends of polarization, the more vulnerable we are to dehumanization, enemies, the very stuff that makes authoritarianism rise and thrive. And so I think it's true. There must be a delicate balance, because I certainly wouldn't want to be saying in my business, only liberals, like I will only coach liberals. Now, again, I'm being open and transparent. People can, come and work with me or not. But like, I think the more we're widening circles of compassion, human rights for all, tolerating difference and diversity, including ideology, the better for our world. And so that's an interesting thought for our businesses. Like, how do we maybe, if we resonate with that, like, how do we find that balance of honoring sort of a certain truthfulness and transparency about what we stand for, but also with that honoring of our full humanity? I mean, that's maybe a bit of a tightrope walk. And just like you have a neighbor, I have family members, and I'm realizing a few friends with whom I have more difference politically than I expected. But yeah, I think even just naming that, I hope for any business owners listening, it's almost like we all sit with these as questions. There's no magic bullets or answers when the times are so sort of fraught and charged, but I'm glad we're naming it.
Yeah, yeah, and awareness is really the first step, right? To name it and to talk about it, and to not be afraid to talk about it. And I feel, that maybe, I mean, I know I have more conservative, subscribers in my audience, for instance, because they have also replied to my emails. And and the only thing I'll say is that, yes, I mean, we've always had different political opinions. We've always had different opinions on policies and how to do things.
Mhm.
I do believe this is different. I do believe this is a different time, where this goes beyond differences of opinion,
Yeah.
and because we are talking about human rights here, for people, and about civil rights, and about the dismantling really of a democracy in favor of an authoritarian system, and patriarchy and all of that, but as we but like you, I mean, I don't want to close myself off, though. We are also in a bubble. I think we have to be
Yes.
very clear about that. We are also in a bubble, like
Yeah.
I call it the blue bubble, and um, that's why I value actually also seeing sometimes what my neighbors say, for instance, in our online groups, and also listening to them, and because a lot of their concerns that they've had were valid, like, concerns about the economy and all of that. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
they were not invalid concerns, and I feel like, this, like you mentioned earlier, the enemy of all of this is isolation, isolation and grief and anger and discouragement and despair. And I think we've all gone through that
Yeah.
and are still going through that, to a degree.
Yeah.
But what are our common points? Where can we connect in our humanity? That are the common points. Because I would say that even Trump voters at their core, because I know some of them are
Mhm.
good people, at their core. I mean,
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
also want to be good neighbors, they want to support and be there to help, and So, I mean, not all of them. You will always have, like the extreme ones who feel like they are better than others, and they deserve more than others. I'm not talking about those people. I'm just talking about
Mhm.
the average people and really probably the majority of people, So where can we connect, and where can we also offer, like a haven for those of us who also feel like right now, like us,
Mhm.
really
Mhm.
the rug is being pulled out from
Yeah.
under us, and one thing that has really helped me is actually my business in all of this, is actually kind of refocusing on my business.
Yeah.
And my business has become almost like my sanctuary, you know.
Oh,
Yeah, it's I think I mentioned that in one of my newsletters the other day, and actually a lot of people resonated with that. And, and it really, because this is one area, like for you as well, where we can help people, our businesses support others, and, we, so by focusing on that, by kind of still, paying attention to our businesses
mhm.
instead of just going like, okay, nothing, I just give up,
Mhm. Mhm.
I feel, yes, I mean, it might not be marching in the streets or anything like that, but I
Mhm.
feel by being these beacons of light or these lighthouses,
Yes.
how did you name that the other day?
I think we had talked about, when the times feel dark or the seas feel stormy and turbulent. And I think we co-created that idea of like, oh, a calm business could be like a
Yeah,
lighthouse, that shines, that illuminates and helps offer some guidance and
yeah,
orientation. It just feels like
yeah.
a
It's
beautiful
actually,
idea. I was just going to say too, sorry, just that idea of like, I like the idea that they're all out there like little glimmers. Okay, what were you going to say?
yeah, no, because there's this quote from Anne Lamott, who says something like, and I'm paraphrasing here. Lighthouses don't go running all over the island trying to save boats. They just stand there shining and, and guide, and I think that is very much what we calm businesses try to do. That's really what a calm business is about. It's about being a lighthouse in this sea of hustle culture, which is very uh, closely associated with patriarchy and and with uncertainty, economic uncertainty, and all of these things, And so, what have you, I mean, we talked a little bit about, what are our like, how do we resource ourselves, through
Mhm.
these times? What are you
No,
finding helpful?
well, I love that. And can I almost take one step back before I directly answer, which is I just felt like even sharing notes briefly on what are we noticing as the impact on small businesses? Like, where are they feeling shaky or vulnerable? I think we've spoken a lot to like as humans, as citizens, like the initial, almost like at the end of the day, we're humans first, and in these we're political creatures as well. But like what I'm noticing, just to say, is definitely the economic precarity. Like I've had clients say some of these last few months, really honestly, since January 20th, Inauguration Day, a notable downturn that I've had a number of clients say, this is the lowest earning month I've seen in 7 years of business. Or, as I say, a few people losing jobs. And I think it's a tighter market because my impression is when a recession is looming, or maybe even already here, it just like everything tightens up. And so I would say I see the economic instability. I have, like, for example, a really amazing coaching peer who's decided like it's too uncertain. She's going to close shop, seek employment. So, like, I have seen people getting quite shaken, maybe especially the financial piece. And I'm trying to think if there's any other direct impact I see on businesses. I think it's mostly that. Have you seen anything else yet or been hearing feedback from your people?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen that as well, where students of mine, they say, I've just lost my biggest client because they are needing to downsize, because they're affected by the tariffs. So quite a few people like that, there are also small businesses like brick and mortar businesses, a lot of them, a lot of create
Yeah.
people in the creative arena, like there's one business I can think of. He used to be an online educator, and then he opened up a stationery shop in Chicago, and he just got slammed with this massive tax bill, because they import things that are made in China. And I mean, it's just like one example, but that is what happens to a lot of small businesses now. And yes, sure, if we can manufacture here in the US, that is not a bad thing. For instance, my Yuli planner has always been, and that was actually at the time when I was looking for a printer for it. I wanted someone in the US. I did not want to print it in China and mass produce it over there. And I was lucky to find someone who still offered it at a reasonable rate, because I don't print in the thousands, um, and it's all US made, but it's a veteran-owned company, so they get a lot of support, of course, being a veteran-owned company,
Mhm.
So, but it takes, for a lot of these businesses to pivot to be making things here in the US. I mean, that takes time, that doesn't,
Yes.
you can't just do that overnight, So, and also, economy, at the end of the day, we have a global economy. And I think, that's not a bad thing, I
Mhm.
feel, and, so yes, a lot of businesses are decimated financially. And I certainly have seen that too. But I think there's also a psychological impact,
Yes.
because of the
Yes.
uncertainty, because now we have an administration that you don't know, are they serious or are they just joking? And you don't know,
Yeah.
or are they going to take it back or not? I mean, there's just like no stability whatsoever,
Yes. Yeah.
because he could just say something in jest, right? Oh, I just said that in jest, and
Mhm.
it's and I think that creates a psychological
Yes.
uncertainty, and that does impact, how
I
we.
love this. I will just riff with you there and then maybe then we can segue there like what's helping, and what are we doing and what do we see? Because I think you're right. There's a psychological term that I learned called learned helplessness.
Ah.
And it's that idea when we don't have a sense of agency, predictability, that's very distressing. Like we're meant to feel some sense of agency and predictability. So you're right. I think on a collective level, this is quite overwhelming. And for businesses, maybe this is one of the things we had talked about when we spoke prior was given that there's sort of this almost bigger context that is profoundly uncertain, and no one of us does have any control actually over some of the big macroeconomic forces and so on. But one thing we had talked about was like how important that calm businesses or like businesses, people you want to support, like a sense of resiliency through ecosystems, resiliency through relationships. And you spoke earlier of like your value of integrity. I think there's something like to almost like create a greater sense of sturdiness where we can create it, even if the ground is quaking under. But where do we, find more strength? So I think that's one thing. And I noticed even my excitement when we began to connect was like I'm looking for those glimmers of collaborative energies. Like I'm thrilled to think some of the business owners in my audience and community could find their way to you. And maybe some of your people would go, oh, I could use a personal coach. Like that feeling of mutuality, reciprocity, people finding what they need, like a web of support. I think relationality matters more than ever in a time like this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree, and I think it's actually reminds me of another thing that I wrote in that newsletter, and where I talk about we need to create like this microeconomy, of
Love this.
solopreneurs. In many ways, we already have it actually, and I think the example that I had was, a yoga teacher hires a designer because they need a website. The designer hires a coach because they are growing and they need clarity and guidance. The coach hires a bookkeeper, because finance is not their area of expertise. The bookkeeper purchases a print from an artist because they want to spruce up their office a little bit. The artist then takes an online course about email marketing, my course, because they want to grow their audience. Then the course creator, who creates that email marketing course, takes an online yoga class, because they love working out at home. And then that yoga teacher rehires the designer because their business is now growing and they need to update their website. And, so it's, in some ways, this is already happening, and, so, and it really actually, leads me to something that I am also, dreaming of, and that I want to, I would love to make that a reality, is to create like a calm business certification program that will also then have a directory of calm businesses, so that we know we have a place where we can go, to find businesses that care about authenticity, integrity, inclusion, diversity, and all of those things. But that also have really good skills and that are, high quality, offer high quality services and products. And that is kind of part of that microeconomy, if you want, and I mean, it's interesting because I talked to my husband about this idea of the microeconomy, and he of course, he has to throw a little spanner into it, and he said, yeah, but Kirsten, so you have this like economy, and you make this money, but then you go and spend this money outside of your microeconomy because you have to pay rent, you have to buy food, and all of those things. But that outside economy doesn't put money back into yours,
Yes.
which is a good point. And to be honest, I'm not an economist, so, but I know that this can still work, so fine. So maybe we don't get that money back, but we still make enough money from each other because we still buy from each other and support each other. And that's all we need. We just need to do it so that we can sustain our businesses and sustain our life, outside of this microeconomy. So I still think, because I'm already seeing it, that this can still work.
Well, and I love it. And I mean, yes, inflation is real, right? So if the cost of living, all those things, of course it impacts, and we're not to be naive about that. But I think that's an important, like, first of all, I love the idea of like values aligned circulation of currency, moving through those kind of ecosystems of calm businesses. And what I notice, and I'll own it for myself too, like, for example, I am in a year-long program, sort of with other small business owners, American guide and facilitator. And when the economy started to quake so badly, part of me, really honestly, thought, oh my God, I wish I could almost like cancel my commitment. Like I signed up, I made the year-long commitment. It's no refunds, especially when I thought, oh no, is the currency going to make it even way more of an expense than I expected? But what I want to underscore, I feel like I've committed and I'll stick with it. But I think that can be the stress response, a protective contraction, like, oh, don't spend, don't invest, like cut, and all those, in fact, like people will sort of say, like, pull your expenses in, like get leaner. And of course, we want to be financially responsible to ourselves and our businesses. But notice that temptation. And I think, again, in some ways, the anchoring piece is how do we calm our nervous systems? How do we regulate ourselves more fundamentally so that we don't begin to unconsciously, constantly react from a protective, stressed state? And because the very virtue that you paint, if everyone freezes up, it won't work. And so there is, that whole bravery to continue to be willing to, and not just think of it as expenses, but investments, not just in our business or the service or the product we receive, but also that relational generativity. And so I think like I really do resonate with with your vision, but I think it takes courage because there can be a tendency to pull in.
Yeah.
So let's spend with care and thoughtfulness and some faith in the
Yeah.
goodness that has come.
Yeah. No, and that is a really, really good point. I mean, it's kind of a knee-jerk reaction, but it's very understandable, and it's but it's courage and also trust. I think
Yes.
there's a good element of trust, and but what I would always say then is, and that is actually also something that I, feel very strongly and about and talk a lot about is, always make sure we have our information, we have our bottom line, because finances do matter in a business, and when things become difficult, I have actually an exercise for that in one of my courses is to work out your bottom line. Really take a good look at your finances. What's coming in? What's going out? What are my expenses? What expenses? I mean, there's almost always something where you can then save a bit, and I'm not saying, necessarily, an investment in yourself, but it's everything. Look at everything, and then work out what you need to make, to meet your bottom line, to meet your basic needs, because we all need that. If we struggle to pay our rent or our mortgage, then absolutely we need to do what we can to protect that. And if that means, yes, I cannot invest in that year-long coaching program, or I cannot invest in Kirsten's course, then that's absolutely fine, because you need to do what you need to do to protect those basics,
I know. It's so
And
tricky though, because sometimes you can shoot yourself in the foot. And that's the discernment we all have to sit with, because sometimes that investment is the very thing that would sort of unleash or unlock the next potential of your business. So that's the
I know.
tension I see there. But I just wanted to, I've never taken your courses. I just love being on your newsletter and a few of the conversations we've had. But my impression of your courses is I just want to give a little plug to you, because my sense is you're almost giving people the 101, the 201, like setting up foundations. Because I think if we have our own foundation in order, that also is going to help us keep that calm nervous system, keep that more expanded creative part of the brain open. Like, I think there's the relational pieces. I think I do a lot around how do we orient ourselves around the natural disruptions of change? What does it take to create and nurture transformation? Or what's the word? Like to manage, to cope, to have post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress through some of those really difficult seasons and periods. But I just feel like you're like a let me help you build your business sort of from the inside out, ground up. And that's crucial because that's a sturdiness then like our own oxygen mask.
Exactly. That's actually a great example. I used to be a flight attendant. I used to do that, stand there with the mask and like, oh, and that is actually a great analogy, we need to put on our proverbial oxygen masks and, strengthen ourselves. And then we can, help others and be part of this, microeconomy and also larger economy, and really and I think you're right. I mean, sometimes it takes courage. I think it takes a lot of trust, the trust in other people, in the system, and also in ourselves, and when right now, that trust is eroded in the systems, a little bit, well, not a little bit, a lot, then maybe it matters more that we have that self-trust still, and also I think what we're seeing a lot right now, and I'm certainly part of that too, is that we're just reacting. I mean, I've certainly spent the last 3 months just constantly reacting, living in a state of reactiveness. And I finally realized, okay, I need to kind of take a breath and and stop for a moment and really kind of see, okay, calm down and if I don't just react to everything all the time, get back to basics, get back to my center, and
Yes.
what can I do from there? And that is where the whole like my business is my sanctuary comes from. How can I nurture that sanctuary so that then it ripples out, to the world
Yes.
around us.
Well, I'm just loving that. I'm inspired just listening. And I know that we both identify as highly sensitive people, and a number of my clients, I think, are cut from that cloth. And so I think especially if we identify with that, or we do feel quite attuned to a lot of the difficult stuff that's happening, I just want to add, like, I think you're bang on that we actually really do need to protect our energy, our emotions. So I know for me and talking with different clients, that balancing, staying engaged, paying attention, being an active citizen, but also deciding like how much news, what sources of news, how frequently do I check? Because I find as a sensitive person like you, like I think I've been pretty bowled over a lot during these last few months. And what I'm realizing too is I actually think I need a little more boundaries so that I can use my gifts, that my sensitivity is a superpower, not a super liability. Because in high stress times, that
Yeah.
doesn't always bring out my best. I am, I can sort of feel overwhelmed more easily than others. So I maybe think this is sort of getting to sort of a place where we might end, which is thinking about us and our businesses and like those lighthouses. Like if those get dimmed, if they're so overwhelmed that they've gotten knocked over and they're just flooded out in the stormy sea, they won't be of use. Whereas, like, how do we nurture those, protect those? And in some ways, like the other gift, I guess, and not in a Pollyanna way or bypassing the very real devastations that are unfolding, but disruptions are also periods that can be generative. And there's a sort of disruption of the status quo and the inertia of patterns. And so it's also like, are there opportunities to be found here? Are there gifts? And I was just at a training recently because I joined a group of coaches. There's an initiative called the Grounded Idealist movement, and coaches are rising up to volunteer their time to support people who have lost their jobs, been furloughed, especially like employment disruption from the administration. And so we're just thinking a lot about how do we coach amidst chaos? How do we coach in a way that's trauma sensitive? How do we support people where things have been, in some cases, so profoundly disrupted? And this quote came, searching for, I just want to get it right, search for the seeds of tomorrow in the rubble of today.
Oh, I love that.
And I really love it because it can be a tendency to only see what's ended, what's died, what's been broken. But if we look, and there are little seeds and there are potentials, and I think calm businesses, calm individuals, the more we can stay anchored and connected, let's nurture and let's trust in the potential. Like, I don't know, but it heartens me to hold that belief alongside the acknowledgement of the painful.
Yeah, yeah, and I think this is a great way to kind of conclude this, because I do believe also that we are in really pivotal transitional times. I actually think this is patriarchy's last hurrah, and they're not going down without a fight, of course not, and uh, but I can almost see what comes after. But unfortunately, there's that sticky middle, which is more than sticky, it's dangerous. It's
Yes.
incredibly unsettling. But I can see something after that, that comes after that. And those seeds, I think, maybe that is also what we look for. We look for those seeds now, and how can we ourselves also be like a seed, um, and so that we can, navigate these changing times. I don't think we will ever go back to what we had, because I think that is being destroyed, um, and maybe, it was never a perfect system, and we never will have a perfect system because we're humans, right? So things will always be imperfect. But I think really coming back, and that's also one of the calm businesses, or calm business, what do you call that? Like, the part of the philosophy is, to come back to the center of being kind, being inclusive, embracing diversity. I love diversity, and really, and maybe it is a bit hippie-ish and all this, to want peace and love and all of those things, but they do matter. I mean, the world is just too dark a place without those things, and I think, that is very much at the core of what we do as well, is to, have integrity, honesty, and kindness, compassion, and all of those things that are often dismissed at, oh yeah, that's too new agey or too hippie or whatever, but it's not, because it's ultimately who we are as humans, and so yeah, so I feel very hopeful after our conversation, actually, and I hope our, viewers, get a bit of that sense of hope as well. And I will probably, create like a little blog post from this, Nicola, and I will share some resources that we find helpful in these times, so I will leave a link to that in the comments. And do you have any parting words for our audience, who feels like, these are tough, uncertain times, and, I don't even know where to start. Where can we start?
Well, I think I mostly want to do a little wrap up, which is to say, I hope that if you related to our sharing, like, I hope you feel less alone, just listening, just hearing us grapple with what we're experiencing and witnessing. I hope that has accompanied you a little bit today. And I hope sharing little nuggets and little metaphors. I love the lighthouse, the seeds, amidst the darkness, amidst the storms. We're not trying to deny that in any way, but I think those anchoring metaphors can help. And I mostly just wanted to add on to your beautiful words, Kirsten, the idea of patriarchy and its last breaths. I almost feel like we've got a braid of white supremacy, patriarchy, and late stage capitalism. And I just want to offer my blessings. May this be ultimately a time of awakening and greater kindness, justice, humanization. And yeah, maybe we are a bit hippies. Maybe we are idealists, but like, I want to hold to that. Yeah. So it's more just I end with a blessing, and then I will definitely follow up and share some of the podcasts and books and people who I'm finding really supportive to sort of tune into. I would love to share those with you for the blog follow up.
Yeah, we definitely will. And I think you've just named it really well, that basically you are not alone. We are not alone. We have each other, and reach out, to people in your community, reach out to us, reach out to others who you feel resonate, with where you are. And yeah, we are not alone. And on this, we will conclude.